Welcome to Well Say Can You See, the bi-weekly program of the Society of Economic Equality, where we discuss the issues that affect working people today in America and in the world. The Society for Economic Equality was founded about 30 years ago by a man named Frank Girard, a man no longer with us, but with us tonight. We have his great-grandson, St. John. We have his good friend, Dick Wiedemann. We have Jasmine. And I, too, was with Frank, one of the original founders of this television program. Tonight we are going to look at some of Frank's ideas as he had expressed them on this program. But before we get into the politics of it, I would just like to talk about Frank personally. Frank was a teacher. A English teacher who became a teacher of teachers. As a matter of fact, St. John could tell us that a lot of students of Frank's ended up being teachers of his. So since you're the most closely related to Frank, why don't you start with a reminiscence or two of the man himself?
Like I was saying earlier, he didn't really discuss politics. The one time it came up, I was a little kid and I asked him what the difference was between a Democrat and a Republican, and he said nothing, they all want money.
So yeah, socialists tend to see the two main parties as just wings of the ruling class party. Frank ran for Congress against
Jerry Ford.
Jerry Ford in 1972. There was a debate on WZZM, including Frank and the future president. From what you told me, it sounds like Gerald Ford sort of got his goat.
Yes, it was a event that was on Channel 13 in Grand Rapids, and Frank was the one who organized it. He was the choice of the Socialist Labor Party to represent them in the election, and socialists never expect to win. They never expected to win. Their purpose was twofold, as Frank expressed it, and that is agitation and propaganda. Agitation was to speak to the working class and tell them about, educate them to their life under socialism, and to make sure that they could see that they were being exploited and taken advantage of. And then after exploitation, propaganda was the next major thing. And that was to propagate the idea of socialism. And socialism is a word which Noam Chomsky says has no meaning. Originally, the word socialism, as understood by Frank Girard, whom this evening I'll probably refer to now and again as the socialist, because that's the term I used to call him by. Socialism is a non-market economy. There is no capitalism under socialism. There is no capitalist class and working class. There's only one class. And so it's a classless society, and it's a society in which all the wealth is produced by workers and shared by them. And that term eventually changed in Europe and became a kind of democratic socialism, and eventually that metamorphosized into a kind of humanism, a nice thing to be and to do. And when across the ocean it came to the United States, became a thing of the devil. And so that leads Chomsky to the conclusion that it's a term that no longer really has any meaning.
So when the Republicans call the Democrats socialists, not only is the term wrong, since they're not willing to give up a cash market economy, but it's just meaningless. It's a scare word.
Yes.
Very true.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, so we've got the Republicans calling Bernie Sanders, for instance, socialist, and Bernie accepts the label and calls himself socialist. But Frank Girard wouldn't have seen Bernie Sanders as a socialist. He would have seen him as a New Dealer.
The New Dealer, yeah.
In other words, like Franklin Roosevelt, interested in saving capitalism from its own excesses.
Yeah, and I think also that form of socialism says we should be nicer to poor people.
Right.
And Frank Girard would say we shouldn't be nice to poor people, we should end poverty.
Right.
The way to do that is to end capitalism.
Frank always used to say people complain about working till April to pay their taxes, but they have to work all year to pay their rent. So, now Frank Girard and you went to India twice, doing the grand tour, right?
Yeah, once we went to India together.
Oh, once you went to India. What year was that? Late 90s?
Yes, I think must have been about 98 or 99. And Frank was a great person to travel with, because for one thing, he was tremendously informed, very well-read man. I remember his saying that when he would come home from teaching at night, his wife Frida would be cooking the dinner. He would sit on the couch or lie on the couch and take a nap. And then Frida would call him for dinner, and then he would watch television with the family until 9 o'clock when the kids were put to bed. And then he would stay up until 2 in the morning reading. That was his time. And as a result, he had a wide range. He was interested in everything: geology, history, politics, literature. And he remembered what he read. And when we were in India, for example, we were in the state of Goa, and we were standing on some kind of orangish colored ground, and he said, "This stuff is laterite. All the tropical parts of the world are made of this." And so that was one of the reasons he was an interesting traveling companion. You could learn so much from him. And another experience we had, which was interesting, Frank was also an atheist, and we went to see a Hindu temple. And our guide, when we went in, there was different things going on, and at one point some camphor was brought out on a platter and it was smoking, and the guide explained that this was to drive away evil and bring prosperity. Then we walked out on the street and could see a lot of poor people, poverty, and Frank commented about the burning of the camphor and said that stuff's as effective as prayer.
Oh yeah, it's a form of prayer. Well, you know, let's get into our first clip. This is from the program From Temp Workers to Slaves, New Developments in the Labor Market. Temp work was a subject that we brought up here many times. So control room, could you play that clip for us? Roll the temp workers to slaves, okay? Can you hear me? Why are they playing the theme music again? Not the theme music, the roll-in from temp workers to slaves.
It comes.
Here it comes?
It's coming after the manifesto. What?
You're playing the theme music. 23 years we've been doing this, folks, and almost got it perfected.
A little more practice should make us perfect.
Oh yeah, it's our original manifesto. Did you run it too fast? Yes, we're a live call-in show. Do call.
Good evening. Welcome to Oh Say Can You See, the bi-weekly live call-in show of S.E.E., the Society for Economic Equality. We come to you on the first, third, and when there is one, the fifth Wednesday of each month with programs that relate to the condition of working people in the Grand Rapids area. Members of the Society for Economic Equality believe that the existing capitalist economic system is inherently unfair and exploitive. Millions of working people pay a very high price for the pleasure of making a few people rich. Members of S.E.E. believe that it is important for the future of our people and our country to understand what capitalism is doing to us and to consider the alternatives to the free enterprise market system. Some viewers may be wondering why S.E.E. would want to look for an alternative to free enterprise capitalism. According to the Grand Rapids Press and the TV news, we're in the middle of one of the greatest economic booms in history. Unemployment is at 4.9%, the lowest in 25 years, and nearly every day the stock market hits a new high. Now that's good news for you if you're a stock owner and are playing the market, but otherwise not so good. So what are we complaining about? Well, the stock market may be rising and jobs may be easier to find, but the Society for Economic Equality thinks that the useful members of society, those who do the actual work, are getting a bum deal. And that bum deal has to do with wages, the price we get for the labor power we bring to the market. If you want to stay alive under the market system, you must have something to sell. And since 90% of us have nothing to sell on the market except our ability to work, the prices of labor is very important to us. Tonight we're going to be talking about a fairly recent development in the labor market, the temporary agencies. Most viewers have heard of temporary agencies like Manpower and Kelly Services and perhaps a couple of others, but did you know about La Primera Bilingual Temporary Services Incorporated, or Norel Staffing Services, or Q-Temps? In Grand Rapids there are over 80 temp agencies, according to the yellow pages of the phone book and research published, done by Jeff Smith and published in the newspaper The Fundamentalist. The title of our show tonight is From Temp Worker to Slave, New Developments in the Labor Market. Here to discuss it with you are our panel, Melanie McDermott on my immediate left, Cliff Alice Curley, I'll try that again, Cliff Alice Curry even farther left, and Mark Zapatowski on my right. My name's Frank Girard, and I'm the moderator for this show. I want to remind you that this is a live call-in show. We'll be opening the phone lines about 8:20.
Oh. Well, there's a little taste of Frank Girard's view. He's taking to task the temp work system, which is just another way for capitalists to get even more of the surplus value of your labor. Because the way the capitalist system works is that the boss puts you to a task that makes him money, and he gives you part of that money. But they thought they were giving the workers too much money, so they thought it would be better to put them into temp services and to have another boss take even another slice of their wages. And these things have become so common. One of our early shows was a critique of Betsy DeVos's charter school system as a way of taking public money and enriching private corporations that were setting up substandard education that would not be publicly accountable. Now, Frank was a teacher, and he understood that the capitalist system needs to indoctrinate people into the system itself. That if people were educated, they would realize they are getting that the gang that runs the show is, as he says, giving them a bum deal and stealing half at least of the value of their labor. And we have nothing to sell in the capitalist system but our labor. That's what makes a working class. Frank understood that the working class was under attack by the ruling class. The ruling class, to remain the ruling class, needs to be at constant war with the working class, and the working class needs to understand that they have to stand up for themselves, but they're indoctrinated into thinking that the ruling class loves them and takes care of them and protects them from the commies and the Muslims and the invading Mexicans who want to take their jobs that they don't want to do anyway. But that was not a very revealing clip of Frank Girard there. Let's run the next clip so we have something more to talk about here. Run that next clip, how the Irish became white. You know how the Irish became white, right? They weren't considered white when they got
By
it.
the way, the other clip was from 1996. The machine has a very slow back and forth. I'm sorry. So as soon as it's ready, we'll run it.
Okay, well, in the meantime,
How did the Irish become white?
they joined the police and started beating up black people for the ruling class. Before that, they were considered less than black people.
Really?
Well, because slaves had a monetary value and Irishmen was expendable.
I recently learned or heard from a friend that the term hillbillies is something that the Irish gave us. They moved here and moved to the mountains in
They
Appalachia.
grew potatoes,
Yeah.
little mounds. But yeah, the Irish were considered subhuman by the English, and that same attitude prevailed here in the U.S. when they came. They were ghettoized with freed blacks, but
Expendable.
is that thing ready to
That
roll?
if the
Oh my
slave
God.
fell sick, he would not be.
It's supposed to be Frank, you guys.
That's my dad.
So 23 years of doing this TV show, and we've got it down pat. But that clip of Frank should be coming from our show from 1997, How the Irish Became White, which was a discussion of Noel Ignatiev's book, How the Irish Became White. He's a history teacher from Harvard who used to have a quarterly magazine called Race Trader, and his idea was that it wasn't enough to be not racist, you have to be actively anti-racist, because as white people with white privilege inside of a ruling class capitalistic America, it's not enough to say, well, I'm not a racist. You have to actually be actively anti-racist, which is interesting because, in the current situation, we have people like Donald Trump saying, I don't have a racist bone in my body. All my racism is in my fat, or something. Because he's, I'm not a racist. I'm the least racist person you ever met. Well, he ain't anti-racist. So is that clip ever going to run, or should I bring up a new topic? So anybody got anything to say about socialism in the modern moment? We see that the Republicans are going to, whoever the Democrats pick, the Republicans are going to call them socialists. And even the most socialist of them is not socialist by Frank's
No thanks, Sandy. Hmm.
What about beyond our borders? I know that they're fighting for socialism pretty hard in the Philippines.
In the Philippines.
Yeah, there's a lot of great music that's coming out of that fight too, and the working class party is there, and they need us to support them. That's there's the disappeared, and there's a lot of people who are just fighting tooth and nail. They're ready to die to have it, and it seems like we're so.
Well, the Philippines has a fascist leader now, a guy that Trump likes. Who's the president of the Philippines now?
I
The
don't
guy who
even
brags
know.
about throwing people out of helicopters and stuff.
I couldn't tell you.
Well, he just tells people to go out and kill people if they think they're drug dealers and stuff. What is his name? Dirty Harry Duterte. The tendency around the world is for the rise of fascism in one form or another.
Mm-hmm.
Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duterte in the Philippines, Boris Johnson in Britain. Democracy and socialism are actually on the ropes right now. But the countries that have socialistic, democratic socialism like Denmark and Finland seem to be maintaining themselves fairly well. But it was countries like Brazil where it's,
Cuba.
Socialism in Cuba has obviously been on the ropes for a long time because of the U.S. embargo. Venezuela is a mess. Maybe not so much from the socialism as from the mere corruption and the.
Well, we do everything we can to snuff them out as soon as they spring up. You know what I mean? I was just reading about, I think it was Chile, when they had a socialist government come in. Elected government come in. And we went in there and
killed a bunch of people.
I mean, even, like North Korea, isn't a socialist country, but South Korea had a referendum before the Korean War broke out, and we went in there and interrupted a democratic election to become a socialist country, and we said, no, you're going to stay capitalist. And it wasn't until I think the 1990s that they actually became a first world power. They were pretty third world under the capitalist regime, and we forced that on them. And the same thing with Vietnam. We tried with Vietnam, but
we interfered with Italy's elections in late
of one skin. So
the socialists from winning.
And then you mentioned how fascism's on the rise, and we don't do, you look at World War II,
make them live together, to ridicule them both as being inferior. And the more that the Irish and the blacks were identified or forced to live in the same neighborhoods, the less they liked each other. But the Irish fought not just the blacks, but they fought themselves. They fought for monopolies on certain sorts of jobs, but by defining whiteness in a capitalist society in terms of what your work is, and then excluding certain groups and keeping them in these subordinate positions. Well, Frank, go ahead.
Well, I was going to point out that it seems to me that what's happening among blacks today is similar to what happened among Irish. What you had was a certain segment of the Irish immigration, I don't know, I guess you'd call it the worst of them in some ways, who simply took advantage of their compatriots. They came over this country, they became the cops, they became the ward healers, they became the political, like the Kennedy family is a perfect example, and simply took advantage of their poorer brethren. And I just wonder to what extent this is going on among blacks today. They did a damn good job of keeping an awful lot of Irish people poor. and at the bottom of the ladder. And the same is true of all immigrants. Yeah, the most, I was trying to think of the word, I can't think of the word, but people who took advantage of their compatriots, their fellow, people from their own country, and simply walked on their backs to the top. And that's going on. You can't tell me that's not what's going on among blacks. It went on among Irish, it went on among others.
Well,
the idea that somehow this is racism is hogwash. I think what's involved here is people taking economic advantage of other people.
Well,
and it doesn't matter whether you're a Yankee or whether you're black or whether you're Irish. It happens.
Ignatia makes that point, and in his afterwards says that he doesn't use the term racism in the whole book because he considers it meaningless, that he's written a labor history, he's tried to focus on not so much on things like union movements as on families and on the functions of spontaneous worker protests. But that brings us to the, another definition that we should explore before we start getting into the history of this. Ignatia draws a distinction between racial oppression and national oppression. In
racial oppression and what oppression?
National oppression.
National?
Yes. And Ireland makes a good example because the British originally ruled Ireland. In the 18th century, Ireland was ruled under the penal laws, and these were a form of racial oppression in that all Irish Catholics were refused numerous privileges that Protestants would have. But it became increasingly difficult to suppress the entire population. So with the repeal of the penal laws and by allowing a Irish Catholic middle class to rise up, then the British could rule under a national oppression by using the wealthier Irish Catholics to help them suppress the rest of the population.
Well, that was more me than Frank right there. Oh yes, Frank was impatient with any definitions that dealt with historical causations that were not strictly about class warfare. Frank's point there, and the one I reinforced, is that if you want to control...
We don't do anything else, we shot people.
If you want to oppress people, you have to have people to oppress them. So how the Irish became white has to do with the Irish joining in the project of white America to oppress black people. After the Civil War, blacks and Irish were often ghettoized together. In fact, there was quite a bit of intermarriage and things like you'll meet a black man named Gillespie, or Duke Ellington's name was John Kennedy Ellington. There's a lot of Irish in the African Americans because of this period, but how the Irish improved their status was by becoming the enforcers of white America. So the stereotype of the brutal Irish cop. But Frank saw everything in terms of the class war, so if anyone has anything to say about the class war as it is now, I would welcome your input.
So what do you think, who's winning the class war?
The rich, obviously. Yes.
We were talking about this the other day, how, because originally, yes, you wanted to talk about China, and I was talking about how China climbed up through, economically they're superpower now, and they climbed up like astronomically, like in the past century, like the past 50 years.
Very fast.
And they did so by exploiting their, their working class. They pay them, there's no, they don't have OSHA or any of the benefits that the working class fought for in the United States. Here, they don't have any of that there. So, we had a bunch of industry ship off to China, and Walmart was obviously a big part of that. They said, if you don't want to make it for cheap, we'll send it to China. They'll do it there. And now the United States seems to be on this downward trend where the working class is convinced that we have to emulate China. I think we have to be, if you're not willing to work for less, you're going to lose your job. And so people are not. It seems to me that we're not comfortable being comfortable anymore.
Well, and that's a terrifying thing to have to emulate because they have like 60,000 workplace deaths every year. The 60,000 was like a really big number to me when I read it. It really stood out.
Oh, it's about what auto accident fatalities are in this country.
Is it really?
But China, they have to put up nets around their Foxconn factories because so many workers are jumping off to commit suicide. Isn't it ironic that we'll embargo Cuba because they're too socialist, but communist China is just fine as long as they exploit the hell out of their workers for cheap labor so we can drive down labor costs here.
Well, they're a capitalist society too. A capitalist, communist, which I don't really understand.
We often used to have callers who would call in and say, why don't you go back to Russia? But Frank Girard always had a good point on that. He said, Russia and China are not socialist or communist countries. They're both state capitalism. You consider central planning to be state capitalism.
Yeah, because he used to say that there wasn't any difference between what was going on in Russia and here. Here we have the capitalists who own the means of production and all the workers who have to scurry to try to find a job. Which is a form of slavery, wage slavery. Unlike the slavery during the Civil War, which was chattel slavery, with wage slavery, with chattel slavery, the workers would run away from the work. And then after everybody's put on their own, has to go and look for a job, find somebody to exploit them. The unemployed worker runs toward the job instead of run away from it like the chattel slave did.
That's why you always need a reserve of unemployed people in a capitalist system.
Keep the wages down.
Yeah. Mark said there always has to be a few people starving, so you'll do the job for less and less.
Someone to compare yourself to.
Pardon me?
Somebody to compare yourself to.
Yeah, and say there, but for the grace of the capitalist go I. We've got a few more clips. This is from our actual first show 23 years ago this month. So if you would roll number 3 from the first show. Is this the one where Frank says there are hungry people in America and Diane Baum says there isn't? So I know it takes you a minute to cue that up. In the meantime, what do you think the chances are for the class war to go the other way? It doesn't seem like most Americans even want to think about a class war, but young people seem to be coming around.
I'm a little optimistic about it because we had the first person on the working class party in Michigan this year. First person get elected, and this was founded in 2011. The working class party here.
In Grand Rapids?
In Michigan.
What, to Congress?
No.
No.
I couldn't tell you exactly what position it was. I think it's like something in education on the east side of the state.
Oh.
We could look that up. Maybe those guys could look it set up back there. The Working Class Party. I mean, that's a big step, and they've been trying to do that for a long time, and now they have had working, I think, well, there's been over 10 people who've run on the ticket as the Working Class Party. Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be as stigmatized anymore to be a socialist. And a lot of people are, I'm not sure, you know, I'm only 30 years old. I can't say what it was like so many years ago. I know it was a big thing at the turn of the century that, you know, after post-industrial revolution, that people said, hey, we're getting the, you know, raw end of the deal here, and socialism kind of took off, and then it got suppressed again. But it seems to be on the rise right now. It seems to be popular. Sauvage Jacques, are you aware of him? He's Marxist superstar. A lot of people really seem to like him. He's really, really popular right now, and he's a Marxist philosopher. And he just had a huge debate with Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson's kind of like a Trumpy type person, and he's libertarian, and he blew him out of the water on national television. It was kind of nice to see.
Oh, well, you know, Frank debated a libertarian on this show. Right?
Yeah.
Did you see that?
I heard about it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Frank would say, you know, you want to get rid of a public space. He says, I like taking my kids to the park.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you guys got that clip queued up from the first show? Is anybody out there?
Very close, he said.
Oh, they're very close?
I believe so. So what about Bernie? You think that...
Because the Republican Party has conned the working class into thinking that if they vote on these social issues with them, that they will help their well-being in the economic area. And I think another problem is that they're being told the government is the evil, and that if you vote Republican, you'll keep more money in your pocket because you won't be taxed as much. The fact of the matter is there isn't too much difference between the taxation levels that Democrats and Republicans advocate. It's simply a matter of priorities. The Republicans will put the money into military and prisons and that sort of thing, and the Democrats will put them in social programs. But the point is, you're basically, well, not enough, Frank, maybe, but the point is, the priorities are simply different, is what I'm saying. And the thing of it is that if you don't have a job at all, it doesn't much matter if taxation levels are low or lower.
Well, let me see if you're saying that the Republicans build prisons as a housing project, and the Democrats build housing projects as a prison.
That's very, I would put.
Like that. Okay, well, that's what he's saying.
Too bad I didn't say that.
It seems to be, from everything I see, the Democrats are going to act to build prisons. And it's
Well, I'm talking about it.
illusory, the difference.
Well, I'm talking about it.
It's a matter of the only two guys who look at the 1930s with Franklin D. Roosevelt as a really great time for working people, right? They voted for policies. What do you get? Well, you get charity, public charity, but they can't do anything to change the system. We need the most best attention.
Well, most of them could have simply go far enough.
Clearly, he was there to save the capitalist system by inventing American liberalism, which means that suffering becomes so great in the masses of people. Capitalism is in danger because revolution threatens. And so you ameliorate the situation, and that's what he did. And
Good thinking.
exactly, this is what he's saying. I agree that that's what happened.
Why vote for a Democrat at all? You know, you're just going to get
Well, for the time being, there hasn't been an alternative.
Well, Frank, there used to be the
Not a viable one.
There used to be the stereotype that if you voted for a Republican, you'd have recessions or depressions, and if you voted for a Democrat, you'd have war. But George Bush took care of that. We had both under him, so
Well,
I guess that kind of shoots that myth.
Well, yeah, I got something interesting that if you're really thinking about...
Let me ask, is Ken still there? Well, thank you very much, Ken. And I wanted to tell the listeners that our number is 459-4881. And I guess you're not just listeners, but you're viewers as well. But please continue, old sage.
Was it Coburn?
What was his first name?
Alexander.
More facts and figures about the condition of the working class, okay?
Fine.
Condition of the working class. Family income declined in the recovery year of 1993. I think this must be a 1990, no, this is November 1994, New Unionists. This is a radical newspaper published in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but things aren't much different in Minneapolis than they are in the rest of the country, and actually this deals with the United States situation. Family income declined in the recovery year 1993 and down over 2,000 since 1989. Think of that. During a time when productivity is rising, which is to say workers are doing that much better, as producing more and more, their wages are going down and down. And in 1993, the U.S. economy grew by 3%, but while more wealth was produced during the year, the average family received less of it.
Excuse me, Frank, we have another caller. Linda, welcome to our show, and do you have a comment or a question you'd like to address to our discussion?
Yes, I do. I wanted to take issue with what Mark had said, coming from working class family, generations of working class family. I have witnessed my family blindly voting Democratic because of being lied to by the unions. Also, I've seen our standard of living and our cultural standards decline in the past 40 years, and not because of any of the presidents, but mostly because of the Congress and the Senate, which has been mostly Democratic. And in the last 40 years is when our civilization and our country has declined, including our buying power. Not I think part of the problem with the take-home wages being less and we're putting out more is that we're being taxed too much. And this is all because of greatly because of 40 years of Democratic rule. And I think that we need to give the Republicans a fair shot and give them a couple of terms to straighten it out.
So are you a former Democratic voter who's now going to be voting Republican?
Definitely. Definitely. I was a staunch Democrat, raised a Democrat. You know, we vote the way the union tells us, and we're shop people and shop people.
Boy, I don't remember that show, but that was a good one. 1994, Frank Girard there, reading from the New Unionist and making his point, the one that he made to you about Republicans and Democrats. They're both wings of the capitalist ruling class party. Now, this is something I always took issue with Frank, so I want to talk about it. Frank always said, don't vote, it just encourages the bastards. But I think it's important to vote, even if you end up encouraging some bastards. And,
why is it important to vote?
What's that?
You say it's important to vote. Why is it important?
Because if you don't, then you're not exercising any of the civic duties that tend towards self-government. I mean, if you don't vote, you're not changing anything. If you do vote, at least you're registering an opinion.
I remember another one of the things that Frank said besides the one you just mentioned for not voting was that Jefferson said that governments govern because of the consent of the governed.
Right.
And if you don't vote, then you withhold your consent.
They don't register it that way. They register it as apathy.
As being lazy.
You know, in the old Soviet Union, you could vote no. The party would pick the candidates, which once in a while people would dislike somebody so much they'd say no. In some ways, that might be more democratic. Here they basically give you two false choices, but
what kind of choice do we have?
Well, it's important.
You have a Democrat and Republican, and they're both capitalist parties. So, as Gore Vidal pointed out, we have only one party in this country, the capitalist party, with two right wings.
Right. I guess you have to vote at the lower levels, the primaries, school boards, city councils. You have to build up the team that that eventually can break through. I really think that young people are a lot more woke than we were. When we started this show, we got the same calls like the Linda right there who's going, oh, the Democrats are lowered our cultural standards. And she didn't mention, like the fear of homosexuals, and we always get the evangelicals every time a building gets hit with an airplane or there's a hurricane. They say this is God's punishment for letting gay people get married and things like that. And there's all these issues that in the past. See, these guys are going, oh, you don't realize how distorted our politics.
I'm perfectly aware. It's still.
And young people aren't going to stand for it anymore, I think. Young people are more interested in the real issues than these weird obsessions that the Republicans and the Democrats are using to distract us from our real interests.
A Christian would argue that life is finite anyways, and this world is material, and all that matters is heaven or hell anyways. But I don't know for certain about any of that, and all I know is that here I am now, and I have this world to interact with, and I don't want to live in a crappy world.
Well, and whether we like it or not, like my generation is just constantly being exposed to different things. I mean, like we have all of our different apps, and we have phones and tablets and computers, and when you're at the gas station, there's a TV screen there, and when you're at the gym, you can watch TV or watch something or hear something while you're running. We're constantly being exposed to different points of view and to different causes, and we, I think, get the opportunity to make up our mind about all of it. I might be exposed to 5 different conflicting viewpoints in one day, but it's not really an issue for me because we get to decide.
Yeah, it's like you're talking about how well-read my grandpa was, and it's true, like he had like a library that filled his entire house, and you could pick up any book off of any shelf and he'd tell you the year it was written, who wrote it, and what it was about, just by mentioning the name of this book.
Yeah, but he had to go out looking for that.
Yeah, he had to read every one of these books, and people like me I don't have that time. I admire him, and I wish I could be like him, but we have different forms of stimulation, different forms of information. Different access to forms of access to information, like you're saying. Like we have the internet. We are incredibly well read this generation.
I first learned about the working class party through music I heard that was recommended by YouTube, for instance. It's just music. It was just for fun, but I learned about it. I learned about what was happening in other worlds, people in other places. They create things for us. Sharing this wisdom. Sorry.
Tell us more about that. I mean, there's worldwide musical movement for human liberation. Tell us about some of the artists and some of the places and some of their issues.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to. I'd have to compile a list because it comes in and then it goes. So if you're not interested in grabbing onto that and learning more, it's just another different point of view that you get exposed to during, a normal day.
Well, let's say someone wanted to get further into it. What would they Google?
Well, you could look up on YouTube. There's a group called Power Struggle.
Power Struggle.
Power Struggle, yep. And they are rappers. It's rap music from the Philippines. It's in English. Some of it is in other languages, a little bit. But they talk about who they are, where they came from, where they're going, where they want to be, talk about their families. It's rap. I mean, that's a lot of rap. I know it can be abrasive sometimes, but there's these veins of hip hop music that focus very specifically on different points of view and issues. You can find a rap artist or group for just about anything you want to learn about, but Power Struggle was a good one. They talk about the issues in the Philippines, the disappeared, the militias killing people, and they talk specifically about a lot of different people who traveled overseas to go back and to protest, to march. Man, I wish I could share it more right now, but I don't know enough about it. But they, here in the U.S., they're very, the group is partial to socialism and the working class party. And back home, they're partial to just basically ending the fighting, the bloodshed, the oppression. And so that's what I learned from just listening to some random music. Yeah, Power Struggle.
Can we cue up the role in number 4, Latin American immigration?
Good evening and welcome to Oh Say Can You See, the live call-in show of S.E.E., S-E-E, acronym for the Society for Economic Equality. S.E.E. is an organization of working class people who are critical of the prevailing economic system and hold it responsible for many of the social ills that afflict the United States and the world in the 20th century. S.E.E. is a broad-based organization. Although our members agree on the need to replace capitalism, we hold different views on how people should proceed and what kind of society should take its place. Last Saturday, S.E.E. sponsored a panel at Grand Valley State University's Conference on the Americas, which had as its theme the subject of Latin American immigration. S.E.E.'s panel was entitled Global Capitalism and Latin American Immigration. Because we brought up the subject of immigration and its effects on jobs in earlier shows, especially immigration from Mexico, we thought that you might be interested in some of the ideas we put forth at the conference. And so we have almost the whole panel here tonight. My name is Frank Girard, and I'm the moderator. To the far right here is Steve Durst, who's filling in for a member of the panel. And he's going to be talking about Dominican Republic and Haiti, I hope, and Latin American immigration in general. Next to him, Jeff Smith, co-editor of The Fundamentalist and a frequent visitor to Mexico and Central America. His topic is Guatemala. On my immediate left here, Tony Travis of the Social Science Department of Grand Valley State University, who has spent time in Mexico doing field work among Native Americans there. He'll be speaking about Mexican immigration. And last, Bill Van Lopik, PhD student at Michigan State University, and for 5 years, a resident of El Salvador. He'll speak on immigration as it relates to that country. The title of this panel, Global Capitalism and Latin American Immigration, reflects S.E.E.'s view that the movement of working people during this period in history is made in response to the economic and political needs of the prevailing economic system, capitalism, and the dominant economic class, the capitalist class. Working people who have no way to gain a living except to sell their ability to work must find a capitalist who will give them a job. Sometimes that means traveling great distances. Sometimes it means going to other countries. What follows here is intended as a very brief summary of the role of immigration in the nearly 400 years during which capitalism transformed North America from a rich wilderness held in common by an indigenous population into a vast reserve of private capital owned by a tiny fraction of the population. If your ancestors came to this country before the Revolutionary War, they were probably forced into it. At least there's a good chance that they were forced into it. People don't willingly leave their homes to go to a strange land. These people, before the Revolution, many of them came as slaves, both white and black. But it was immigration, wasn't it? If they were white, they were displaced small farmers. The circumstances were this. British landlords, in this period before the Revolutionary War, discovered that they could make more money from raising sheep than from renting the land to small farmers. And so well, they did the normal thing. What would you expect a capitalist to do? They simply transformed all those farms and into sheep pastures, and they evicted the farmers who had been renting there. These people had nothing to live on. There were no factories to speak of in those days, and so they were wandering the roads begging and stealing and doing whatever they could do to make a living, and the government cracked down. And eventually what happened is that they'd go down to a port and simply sell themselves to a ship owner or a ship captain and be transported to the colonies. And when they got there, they were auctioned off to pay the cost of their passage. These were not very pleasant trips either, I can tell you, because all the stories we hear, the ships were horrible, overcrowded, not enough food, not enough water, disease-ridden, and when they got to the dock at Philadelphia or New York, they were auctioned off. They had to work 7 years as slaves, and in fact, the government of the colonies dealt with them just as they dealt with black slaves. If your ancestors were black, the situation was rather different. Black people did not come down to the docks to sell themselves to a ship owner or to a slaver. Instead,
another bit of Frank Girard.
in short, to provide labor for the developing industrial economy. Many of our ancestors came during this period. If you're German or French or Dutch or Polish, the chances are very good that your ancestors came here during this period. And millions of people did. And they did the work, and there was unlimited immigration during this period. During and after World War II, the mechanization of agriculture released a new wave of potential wage slaves. We had a kind of internal immigration. People were thrown off the land basically by the result of the mechanization and industrialization of agriculture, thrown off the land, both in the South, where sharecroppers no longer had jobs because cotton and the raising of cotton had been industrialized, and in the North, because of tractors and so on, people could no longer make a living on a 40-acre farm as they did when I was a young man. So these people poured into the factories during the period from 1942 to about 1975. And as a result, there are a lot of low-paid occupations. People left such occupations to get into the factories and into the higher-paid jobs. So there's a lot of low-paid occupations in urban service work and rural agricultural work. These were left without an adequate labor supply. The capitalists needed labor, and this opened the way for a new immigration from Mexico and Puerto Rico and elsewhere in Latin America. This virtually unrestricted immigration helped U.S. capitalism by creating the oversupply of labor deemed necessary to control wages. It's this most recent immigration, its causes and its consequences, that's the subject of this panel. And our first speaker will be Steve Durst, who's filling in, and
Yep. Hey, folks. Hey, over here. Come on. Let's have a camera here. All right.
Our time is almost up here. We've been looking at some clips of Frank Girard, who was our founder. I meant to
take a few minutes to wrap up. We're going to go like an extra 5 minutes.
We're going an extra 5 minutes then. Good. So this program is the first of our new season, season 23 of Osakan. You see the Society for Economic Equality's attempt to make sense of the class war in America for 22 plus years now. We have been discussing issues like Latin American immigration. And tonight we are remembering our founder, Frank Girard, and trying to get back to our roots as a socialist critique of American capitalism, American politics. So with me tonight we have Jasmine St. John, Dick Wiedemann, And I am going to turn it over to Dick and then over to you guys for a few last comments. We have 3 minutes.
Well, thank you, Steve, for the invitation to be here tonight. I enjoyed myself, especially seeing the clips this evening of Frank Girard, belovedly known to me as the socialist. It was a wonderful trip back in time. I was also delighted to see that you were young at one time.
Oh, I was delighted to see that too. I almost forgot. Let that be a warning to y'all. Now, yeah, I was about St. age when Frank Girard first came up to me at Socrates News Center. I didn't know who he was, and he said, hey, do you think capitalism is the cause of all the evil in the world? And I said, well, maybe not all the evil, but it certainly makes things worse. So we started a discussion group there at the cafe. And one day we said, you know, we could sit here and talk to ourselves, and we could go on TV and have the same conversation. And Frank's like, oh, they wouldn't let us on TV. I said, they let us on TV at GRTV, so we need young people to get involved and carry on this work of critiquing American capitalism. You young people are going to be the ones who suffer from the late stages of capitalism, and if you've been paying attention, you'll see that late stage capitalism puts kids in cages and will...
That sounds like a threat.
It is a threat. It's a big threat.
Oh, great.
I mean, now that they got robots, they don't even need workers. So
that's right. Robots, artificial intelligence, the rate of unemployment in the next 20 years is going to make your hair fall out.
Hey, that's why the El Paso shooter went on a rage. He said specifically automation of his job, you know, was a major contributor, you know, so...
Well, why wasn't he shooting robots instead of Mexicans?
I don't know. You're a little confused, I think.
Yeah, it's
a little dumb.
Mexicans are robots.
A little dumb.
But yeah, it is a nasty future they got planned for us. But at least it'll be short. It's not the music, because, you know, the ruling class, the rich have been winning the class war. The final solution is at hand. The Bilderbergers, they say, you know, get rid of 6.5 billion people, and rich people will be happier. A lot more hope.
Well, let's just exercise our right to argue.
Argue with the crowd control weapons, the military robots. They're not even going to need us for soldiers. So, you know, so the only reason the ruling class didn't wipe us out all before, right, is because they still needed us, more or less.
Oh yeah, they need us.
They need us even now?
Oh yeah.
What for?
I don't know, we're still here though.
Well, that's because, you know, they're
must
so
need us
lazy
for
they haven't
something.
programmed the robots to wipe us out yet.
Oh, you may be right. I take a different view.
What is your view?
It's just much less cynical.
Oh, see, this is something that comes from age. That's why we need young people. People full of hope.
I am
have to
full of
hope. Yeah. Well, old people like me, jeez.
Yeah, every day of your life is like impending doom, right?
Well, it's always been that way. I mean, I grew up in the 60s. I always thought they were going to drop easier.
Keep talking.
Look, you know, I'm surprised we made it this long.
I'm surprised I made it this long as your daughter who had adopted you.
You know, the documentary.
Yeah, that the world's perpetually about to end.
Well, that's not a
yeah, but it's been
geological
yeah, that's true.
Didn't NASA just say that we have to overthrow the rich if we want the world to survive?
Did they?
Yeah.
Because I can back anything NASA says.
They said.
Yeah,
No,
I'll
that's
stand
exactly
be-
what they
I'll
said,
stand
verbatim.
beside that. I'll stand beside
Gotta
it.
overthrow the rich.
If NASA said it, well then.
They said that before ecological or economic downfall, the rich likes to create a buffer between them and the working class, and that's what they're observing right now.
Yeah, gated communities. and
From their
stuff.
freaking telescopes too, they can see it.
Can't we just send them all to Mars?
I think
Yeah.
that's the plan.
Yeah, that's why they're terraforming Mars. Just send all the rich people there and leave them. Come back to the utopia we have on Earth. The rich are gone.
We won't let those stay for that.
Yeah, man, space backs.
We'll build a wall around here.
Yeah.